It's okay.
Okay. So as mentioned by Trung, the topic of this webinar is the role of the employer. What I'll be presenting is a perspective from my own personal experiences, some practical tips and lessons learned during implementation of the hydropower development program. The contents, basically a brief introduction on the central role of the employer, and then two fundamental obligations of the employer, which are availing finance and land for the project, and then some procurement aspects like appointment of the engineer and the carrying out of the studies, designs, and bidding documents, and then some aspects related to contract implementation. So first of all, just some brief points on the role of the employer. Let's just start with this brief overview of the activities in contract management, both upstream and downstream activities. So what this slide shows is that contract management does not start with signing of the contract. Procurement is a very important determinant factor in success of the implementation of the contract. And of course, the employer plays really a prominent role in implementation of the procurement. Following signature of the contract, the engineer, of course, will play a prominent role together with the employer in the implementation of the contract. But in procurement, really the role of the employer is paramount. So I will be focusing on some aspects of procurement, such as selection of the right engineer, implementing the feasibility studies designs, and then selection of the right contract. And then just some few aspects of actual contract management and implementation. And as I just mentioned, I will be presenting my personal experiences when I was working as a contracts manager with this employer organization, which is called the Dams Implementation Unit. It was part of the Ministry of Water Resources and Electricity in my home country of Sudan. So this unit was charged with the implementation of a hydropower development program, which started around about 2000 and carried on for almost 20 years. So I was contracts manager for about 9 years between 2007 and 2016. And during these 18 or 20 years, there were 3 large dams that were completed at a cost of just over 4 billion. And there is a resettlement of over 200,000 affected people, and also a lot of associated projects, such as housing, infrastructure, and irrigation projects for the affected people, and also a lot of projects to improve access to these remote locations where the dams are located, such as road network. There was at least 1 large regional airport, plus some airstrips and some railway connections to improve access, and also a lot of general development projects in these rural areas to improve water supply as well as health services. In addition, also as part of the program, all the hydropower potential on the Nile and its tributaries was studied. And as a result, 11 large dams were identified and fully designed in detail, as well as 2 large associated irrigation schemes. Now, the employer really right throughout the project implementation really deals with a large number of parties. So, for example, dealing with the international financial institutions or multilateral development banks, as well as the Ministry of Finance for the financing, for approval of procurement decisions, dealing with the Central Tender Board. In our case, this was part of the Ministry of Finance. Also, we used to have on an annual basis, the Auditor General would visit the organization for auditing of our contracts and auditing the finances. And of course, also on such a large program, we were dealing with a large number of local and international consultants and contractors. At any one time, in the contracts department, which I was managing, we would be managing an average of about 100 contracts. Sometimes this would increase and peak at around 150 contracts, sometimes go down to about 60 or 70 contracts. But basically dealing with a large number of consultants and contractors with all the challenges that go with that. And in addition, the employer, of course, deals with a large number of other stakeholders, as I said, the affected populations, other government departments, and so on. Now, two fundamental obligations of the employer. These are sometimes taken for granted by the engineer and the contractor, but they actually entail a lot of effort, time, resources, and a lot of money. So in our case, two sources of finance. The first was the Ministry of Finance. And for this, we needed to prepare an annual budget. Basically, for all ongoing contracts, we would roll over all remaining amounts and then add the new contracts that were planned for the new year, which meant that we needed to prepare a procurement plan with dates, cost estimates, procurement approach, whether national or international bidding, because that would give us the foreign currency, local currency distribution, and then the cash flow by quarter. And the Ministry of Finance then would decide how much to provide from the national budget and when to go for external finance. And in such cases, it would send a request for financing to the IFI or MDB. And as a result, we would receive a project appraisal mission, a team of experts that would come to visit us as the implementing agency for at least 1 or 2 weeks, and with a long list of information that they need to appraise the project. Such information will include, for example, technical economic feasibility of the project. They want to check the design, ensure it's a robust design. They need reliable, updated cost estimates. This is very important for determining the financing amount. They want to know about the procurement approaches, the procurement strategy, procurement plan. And very importantly, they need to assess the implementing agency capacity, and they need a lot of country economic data. And all this has to be evidenced by documentation. So basically, this is a huge effort. We need to prepare dozens and dozens of different documents that fulfill all their needs, and we need to attend to them and answer all their questions. And of course, the engagement with both these sources of finance continues throughout the project. Coming now to availing the land for the project, hydropower, I think, is really an extreme example, because in many cases, there is a large number of affected populations, and this takes years and years and a lot of resources and effort to manage the resettlement process. This is a summary of the process. First of all, you need to enact the enabling legislation for expropriation of the land and for compensation of the affected people. You need to carry out the census, construction of the new housing, then paying the financial compensation and the actually physically resettling the people, and also our legal department used to handle the process of the complaints tribunals. And I'm just giving here some two brief examples. The Meru Dam, which was completed in the year 2010 at a cost of about $2 billion. The resettlement cost was $500 million, and this included housing and infrastructure, water and power, and also irrigation schemes for livelihoods of the affected population, and over 70,000 were resettled. In the Upper Atbara Dam, which was completed in 2016 at the cost of $1.5 billion, the resettlement cost was $300 million, and this went mainly into constructing about 30,000 homes over a period of about six years. So this is a huge effort involved in the resettlement. In addition, for the Upper Atbara Dam, there was also a large undertaking, because there was an environmental requirement that all the woodlands that would be inundated by the reservoir, they needed to be cleared because when the reservoir is full, it was expected there would be a large amount of methane production, and methane, of course, is a greenhouse gas, as you know. So all these woodlands needed to be cleared, and this was also a huge logistical undertaking. So basically, availing the land and the finance, this takes a lot of time and effort from the employer, and it should not always be taken for granted. There could be hiccups and challenges along the way. Coming now to the procurement. So I think we all know that this is one of the most important decisions, the appointment of the engineer, that is made by the employer, because of the crucial role and the engineer plays in the success of the project. So I think we all know the process. There has to be clear terms of reference, comprehensive RFP prepared. You have to decide on the selection method, quality and cost-based selection. This is the most common method. And very importantly, you have to develop appropriate shortlisting criteria and evaluation criteria. It's a two-step process. There's a shortlisting first of all, and then there is the actual proposals and offers and the evaluation criteria. And what you are targeting, of course, is selecting the most qualified consultant for the task. And this needs a lot of attention to be paid to the shortlisting criteria as well as the evaluation criteria. And one aspect which is very important that we should pay attention to is this phenomenon of abnormally low proposals, very low offers, which run really a huge risk of very poor quality output and deliverables and service from the consultant. And in the standard RFP that is adopted by the MDBs, this aspect of abnormally low proposals is dealt with by a financial adjustment to the financial offers. And here the employer really needs to have the capacity to be able to estimate the key experts' time input. And this needs to be inserted in the data sheet, as you can see here, based on a detailed analysis of the services and the expected time input. And then if the consultant offers a lower time input, there would be a financial adjustment as per the formula here, which is the missing time input is multiplied by the highest remuneration rate for a key expert. And this is added to the financial offer so that all the offers are compared on an equal footing. This is very important for the employer really to take this into consideration when preparing the standard RFP, because as I said, there's a huge risk of getting low offers. And then as a result, if you get low financial offer, almost certainly in the combined technical and financial evaluation, the consultant would win, and then there is a risk really of poor services. In the RFP, there is a note that this adjustment is done only for time-based contracts. It's not for lump sum contracts. So basically for supervision services. Coming now to the studies, designs, and bidding documents. First of all, the feasibility study. Normally, the engineer would prepare various options and would recommend the best option for the scheme. It's really crucial for the employer to study very carefully these options and to make sure that the optimum option has been selected. Not just the overall scheme, but also the individual components of the scheme, that all of them have been optimized. Normally, the detailed design is just an elaboration of the scheme that has been chosen at the feasibility study. So if there is any shortcoming in any of the components, and this is not detected during the detailed design, then this would carry forward to the implementation. It can be detected during implementation, and then you would have very expensive variations because the employer would have lost, of course, the competitive advantage that he had during the bidding process. So this is just a practical tip for the feasibility study. Another practical tip during the site investigations is that the contract manager really needs to be involved in the decision-making process regarding the scope of the site investigation. Normally, from the employer's perspective, there is a huge pressure to economize on the site investigation. And of course, we all know that this is counterproductive. Why? Because there will be immediate impact. The bidders will assess the risk, and then they will include this risk in higher tender prices. During implementation, of course, you will get the usual variations, claims, disputes, and so on. So it's really crucial for the contract manager to be involved in the decision-making and to explain the impact of a poor site investigation and to be actually involved in the decision-making. Another aspect that the employer needs to make a decision on for these complex projects, there is a lot of information that needs to be gathered in the field. For hydropower projects, you need aerial survey and mapping, GIS data. You need hydrology and bathymetry of the river. You need geotechnical, geophysical data. You need environmental studies. In some cases, you also have to do archaeological studies. And you need to make a decision whether to do this via direct contracts or to include this in the scope of the consultant. And really, from our point of view, it was better actually to do this via direct contracts, because then we could actually gather all this information for the various projects on an integrated basis without having to do it separately for separate projects, because the projects would be done by would be distributed amongst various consultants, depending on the procurement process. So all this data gathering became the responsibility of the employer, and we had to ensure the accuracy, timely delivery, and proper format of the information. Now, review of bidding documents is critical. We started actually on design of the subsequent projects only after the first dam had progressed substantially, which means that after 3 years of implementation of the first dam, we actually had already dozens of engineers who had already gained considerable experience in design and construction of dams. And that meant that we had now the capacity actually to review designs. So we had international contractors, from Europe, Germany, France, UK, and from Australia. But nevertheless, this is a huge set of documents, and even the best consultants, you will always find some shortcomings here and there. So it's really crucial to have a multidisciplinary team, a full team. The disciplines involved in hydropower could be up to 12 or 15 different disciplines. So we need to have all these disciplines there around the table to review the bidding documents and to discuss these, of course, with the consultant so that the best document is produced at the end. Regarding the contract packaging, so I'm showing here a typical output of a feasibility study showing the estimated cost. So the dam civil works estimated at $800 million, 780 megawatt power station estimated at $275 million, 450 kilometer transmission line, $360 million. And basically, we adopted the conventional approach to packaging, which is having the civil works as a measurement contract with the FIDIC Red Book, the turbines in the power station as design build, FIDIC Yellow Book, and the transmission line also as design build with FIDIC Yellow Book. In some international practices, you may find that the hydromechanical works, these are basically the gates that form part of the dam. These are design build works. In some practices, you find this as a separate contract. This actually we did in the first project, in the first dam, but actually there's too many interfaces because these are an integral part of the dam. So in subsequent projects, actually, we combined these two, and as a result, what we had was actually a hybrid contract, because the contract borrowed heavily from the Yellow Book, provisions such as design, testing, and commissioning. All these were borrowed from the Yellow Book and incorporated in the particular conditions of the Red Book for the hydromechanical work. So you actually had a hybrid contract for the civil works. And in this type of arrangement, the employer would be responsible for the coordination between the contracts, because you have the civil works contractor building the power station building, which is a huge building, and then the power station contractor doing the turbine manufacturing and installation working within that building. So there has to be coordination between these two contractors, and this was done via clauses 8.3 and 8.7 in the particular conditions. So basically, during the preparation of the bidding documents, the engineer would prepare an overall project program with all the contracts there, specifically the civil works contract as well as the turbine contract. And from this overall or global project program, the engineer would identify the interface milestones. And this would be inserted in subclause 8.3 for the program as intermediate milestones for the two contracts. And these milestones, some of these milestones would be penalized. Why? Because any delay in these penalized milestones would mean that there would be a cause for claim by the other contractor. So this would be penalized. And however, the clause would state that the delay damages could be returned to the contractor if he achieves the next milestone, provided that two conditions are met. First of all, in the opinion of the engineer, completion of the whole works can still be achieved. And secondly, any cost or loss incurred by the employer is deducted, meaning if there's any claim from the other contractor, if the other contractor was ready and he was delayed, then there could be a claim on the contractor, and that would be deducted from the contractor that caused that delay. Another clause in the particular conditions was the price adjustment formula. This was really a thorny issue because in the first dam, we adopted the standard FIDIC formula for adjustment of materials, labor, and equipment. And the indices, the contractor was from a country where the construction indices were not in the public domain. And this caused an issue because the indices increased sharply during implementation and the cost increased sharply. And there was a dispute regarding the reliability of these indices, regarding the calculations, regarding the interpretation of the clause, and it went to DAB. And as a result, in subsequent projects, that formula was amended to include adjustment of only specific materials, namely cement, reinforcing steel, and structural steel, and proxy indices were adopted, that were reliable and were in the public domain. Another clause that was in the particular conditions, the advance payment. Traditionally in these huge projects, you are paying an advance payment of, say, 10%, which is a huge amount, tens of millions of dollars. And quite often you get, late mobilization by the contractor. So the advance payment, we used to stipulate that it would be paid in 3 installments, 5% upon submission of the bank guarantee, 2.5% upon completion of the site establishment, and 2.5% upon completion of the stone crushing plant and the concrete batching plant. Coming now finally to contract implementation very quickly. Of course, the employer has to administer the engineer's contract because the engineer would administer the construction contract and the contractor, of course, would administer the subcontract. So the employer has to be responsible for administering the engineer's contract. And that means actually that the employer needs to have full-time presence on the site. We had perhaps an employer's organization full-time on site of about 30 engineers, multidisciplinary team, following basically the progress of the work and being the first point of contact, of course, for the engineer and for the contractor. In addition, also, we had a large number of engineers, site engineers and senior engineers who were seconded to the engineer. Basically, the engineer's organization on site was of 4 levels. There was the engineer's representative, there were the chief engineers, and these 2 grades were expatriate staff. And then senior engineers, most of them were local staff with some expatriate staff. And all the site engineers, these were local staff. And the site engineers and the senior engineers, these were hired and paid for by the employer, but seconded to the engineer and managed by the engineer. And this meant that we had 2 sets of engineers on the site, and we managed really to build the capacity of our teams through this full-time presence on the site. And they were, of course, available because there used to be a rotation system whereby they could be taken back to the headquarters if we needed them, to work on the other projects that were ongoing in terms of investigations and designs. And it's very important, of course, for the employer to coordinate with the consultant, to have frequent meetings, because the employer needs to be updated really on the variation orders, the claims, because the employer needs to ensure the continued availability of the financing, the utilization of the contingency, not just the contingency in the contract, but also there would be a contingency item in the financing, and also contingency available from the employer's budget. And sometimes also there could be a need to apply for supplementary financing from the financing agency. And one aspect also which is very important, which is the employer needs to finalize the operation and maintenance arrangements as early as possible. Otherwise, you could face late variation orders, which can be really a big inconvenience. Just a final point regarding amicable settlements. So we know that the 2 parties are encouraged to agree in FIDIC just before the issue of the engineer's determination. And also the employer and the contractor, they are also encouraged to agree to have an amicable settlement following a DAB decision and just before going to arbitration. What we used to promote was actually not just agreement on individual specific issues, but global agreements of all issues in the contract in one package, in one amicable settlement agreement. Normally, this would be towards the end of the contract where there are various issues. And these are some of the issues that you can see here that normally arise towards the end of the contract. And really, the approach of the employer here is really to focus on the objectives, the overall objectives of the employer. So the employer is not targeting really to extract monies from the contractor. This was the policy of our management on these issues. What we are trying to achieve is completion of the project, operation of the project, and this is the benefit that we will extract, from this, project. So we were focused on handing over any sections that have not been handed over, remedying any remaining defects. So basically, the approach to the amicable settlement agreement is the contractor has to commit to the handing over of remaining sections, commit to remedying any defects, and sometimes there would be outstanding payments, delayed payments. The employer would commit to payment of these outstanding amounts on a specific date, and specific dates committed to by the contractor for outstanding activities. And then there would be compromise on the financial issues. For example, the employer could waive the delay damages for outstanding sections in return for the contractor waiving financing charges, waiving any claims. Sometimes there could be DAB decisions or referrals. Even a DAB decision, sometimes the contractor compromised or on decisions that were in his favor. But we managed to get substantial reductions in return for waiving the delay damages. And sometimes DAB referral by the contractor would also be cancelled. Basically, all claims waived by either party as a financial settlement. And with this spirit, the contract could be completed with the minimum of disputes. So I think I've crossed the finishing line, and